je laisse tout de suite la parole à deux éminents spécialistes de ces questions. D'abord, le professeur Martin Schlag, qui est professeur de théologie morale et directeur du Centre de recherche sur les marchés, la culture et l'éthique à l'Université pontificale de la Sainte-Croix à Rome. Vous avez exercé des responsabilités au sein de l'Opus Dei en suivant dans un certain nombre de pays les activités aussi économiques et les efforts pour penser un renouveau de l'économie. J'avais regardé dans ce que vous avez écrit cet effort pour sortir de la fascination des marchés financiers, pour faire de la visée éthique un moteur de nos modèles économiques. Et vous mettez un accent particulier sur l'humanisme chrétien, l'histoire de la pensée économique et la foi chrétienne, et les bases anthropologiques du management. Je vous laisse la parole.
Thank you very much, Sister Cécile, for these very friendly words of introduction. Your Eminence, Excellencies, dear friends, Pope Francis has repeatedly stated, and Cardinal Turkson this morning reminded us, that the economic crisis we are in is actually a moral cultural crisis. And I would specify it is a moral cultural crisis of Western civilization. In general, I think we have to be careful with the word globalization. The world economy is not wholly globalized. Professor Gemmerwart of Harvard University in his books defends the concept of a semi-globalized world economy. And he brings the example of big corporations like Coca-Cola, who thought that the world was globalized. And for instance, they introduced a globalized form of marketing, and they had the same kind of commercials for the whole world. And they saw that that didn't work, so they had to return to the original structure of regional, specifically regional adaptations. Now, I think this is important for us because there is no global answer to the problem, no global technical answer to the problem, but there are global responses which we, from Catholic social teaching, can give to the economy, impulses, as Pope Benedict XVI has done in his great encyclical Caritas in Veritate. Now, Saint Bernardino of Siena called money the blood of society, and it has to circle and flow back to the heart to keep the whole body healthy. And using this image, we can say that the present economic difficulties are a blood poisoning. Our blood has been poisoned. There's a cardiovascular disease. The financial system needs to be purified of the sinful elements it also contains. And it has in part been diverted from its essence as a service to the real economy, the so-called real economy. In my reflections, however, I shall not talk about these financial aspects because it has already just been done, and the Pontifical Council has published documents, and others have and Excellency Toso has also written on these topics. So I will try to formulate my thoughts into three theses for a possible global response on the level of principles. And these three theses are affirmation, freedom, and contemplation. I'm inspired by the four principles in the encyclical Pacem in Terris, which Cardinal Suenens, shortly after publication, summed up in this sentence: peace among all people requires truth as its foundation, justice as its rule, love as its driving force, liberty as its atmosphere. So truth and freedom, justice and love, these four famous principles. Now my first thesis is truth and justice, truth and justice require that we first and foremost affirm the basic goodness of the Western economic and financial system as it is, the basic goodness. It would be unjust and untrue to accuse the whole system as such of being inhuman, exploitative, corrupt, beyond salvation. On the contrary, it is a real public good. The first step in the new evangelization as a process of cultural transformation is loving the culture and the society, the people and the structures in which we live. That is the first step in evangelization. Love to what exists. New evangelization does not mean the destruction of what exists, but its transformation, its purification, the purification of our economic system from the sinful elements it unfortunately also contains. And I say this because there is a certain tendency in our Catholic tradition not to understand the functioning of our Anglo-Saxon economic system, which has become the winning model. Evangelizing the economy and the world of finance does not mean replacing the existing reality with something else, perhaps with a religious or confessional form of the economy. Such attempts can only end in disaster. A negative or accusatory stance of the Church would either offend and repel many people of goodwill working in these fields of activity, or make the Church's social teaching appear irrelevant in the eyes of experts. So I think we really have to take seriously what Caritas in Veritate says, that the Church's magisterium does not offer technical solutions, and we have to be strong, I think, as teachers of social ethics in the economy, not to be too fast in giving them. You know, a politician once told me there are situations where the best action is not to do anything, and he said you can't believe how difficult it is not to do anything, because his constituents usually do not call him and say, please do nothing. You know, they say, why aren't you doing something? You know. So, and the same goes for us. They say, well, why don't you speak up more and talk about the details and tell us what we have to do? And then as a priest and as a teacher of Catholic social teaching, I have to say, well, look, I can give you the principles, but it's up to you as a layperson working in this field to put this into practice. You are the one who understands the difficulties and the complexities of all these financial instruments. I've just read a book by a 15th century Croatian-Italian scholar, a merchant. He wasn't a scholar, Benedict Cotrugli. And he's very respective of the Catholic faith. He says, a merchant must go to Mass every day and pray to God. But then he says, I can't understand some condemnations by moral theologians who are talking about things which I had difficulty to understand. And he says, it took me 2 years to understand what a bill of exchange is. And I read these condemnations, and he says, I'm afraid they are like blind people talking about colors. You know? So I think we have to be careful of of going too much into details. And despite of what I have said, the task of Catholic social teaching is immense in the context of the economy. It consists in clarifying and constantly reminding all people of the main principles of Catholic social teaching: human dignity, the common good, solidarity, subsidiarity. As Pierre Manon wrote, the Catholic Church, Mediatrix of the mediator, has no other political task, but it is an urgent one, than making itself a convincing witness of the goodness of God. I think in our Western world, with its Christian roots, I think our task in the church is to keep heaven open. I come from a city, or I've lived many years in a city, Vienna in Austria, which from November to February is always cloudy. You never see a ray of sunlight, and that is very oppressive. So it's the task of the church to keep this sky open, this contemplative spirit. My second point is, so we've had truth and justice. My second point is the liberty given to us by the Spirit of the Lord is also a freedom from the idolatry of money and from the trap of relying exclusively upon material aims to achieve our happiness. The Christian faith helps us discover that the structures and institutions that make up our economic system in which we live are the unintended collateral effect of something much larger. Josef Pieper, the German philosopher, once said, "Culture is the result of leisure." And I think Western civilization is the result of the intention to achieve something other than itself. The institutions in our economy and in our political life were not built as aims to themselves, but are the collateral effect of something much larger, much higher. They are the byproduct of contemplation. Now, what is contemplation? Contemplation is the attitude of looking. It is the attitude of accepting what I see without trying to change it in a forceful way. It quietly observes and is amazed at what it beholds. Contemplation desires to know how and why things are, not only how they function or for what they can be used. A contemplative person does not rely exclusively upon his own efforts, but is open to God and to transcendence. Contemplation is open to the Savior. It is eccentric. It has its center outside itself. It has room for the other person. It doesn't reduce others to a means, but can realize that they are an aim unto itself. Remy Brague has characterized the Western civilization with the term Romanitas. And he says, well, the catching image for this idea is the aqueduct, which bridges a valley and brings water from one side to the other. And this implies an inclination. One side has to be higher than the other. So this is open to the idea of superiority. The Romans were aware that they had received culture from the Greeks, and they passed it on to us, the barbarians. And the church has lifted this idea up of Romanitas up to the idea of sacrament, to the dimension of grace. The church bridges the chasm between heaven and earth. It is a real symbol for a greater invisible heavenly dimension. It points beyond itself. It is eccentric. And I want to argue that our Western economic and political institutions have emerged from this loving devotion to God, expressed in a spontaneous and even playful way. I've learned from Professor Zamagni, who is here on the panel, that a lot of our economic institutions are a fruit of the Franciscan school of economic thought. Francis, whose feast day we celebrate today, prohibited his friars to have money. They weren't allowed to have money, but they were allowed to use it. So for them it was clear that the value of a thing was not its possession, but its use, its utility. And they weren't allowed to have the money themselves, so they gave it to a spiritual friend, a kind of manager. And he was accountable to the friars, so they invented the double entry system of bookkeeping. It's an invention of the friars. And they were in contact with the poor, and they saw that the canonical prohibition of interest as usury was counterproductive, because the craftsmen and the farmers, the small and medium entrepreneurs of that time, were unable to get credit. So they had to go to the usurers, and they were prey to these people who charged 100% interest, 200, 300% interest. So they set up the Monti di Pietà. These, we would call them the first kind of normal bank in our sense. And the same is true for our political institutions. The only institutions in the Middle Ages who functioned by what we would call democratic principles were the monasteries. That the king had his council, but it was always the king who decided. But in the abbeys and in the monasteries, it was the majority of members who decided. And so when the Assemblée Nationale in France in 1789 started its deliberations, they looked for an order of procedure, and as there was no civil order of procedure, they took the Cistercian one. So all these things emerged not because we were trying to create an economic or political system, but because we were trying to give glory to God. Saint Benedict writes, "Nihil operi Dei preponatur." Nothing is more important than prayer. However, in his rule, Benedict does not command only serious work and prayer, but he also commands the siesta. And after the siesta, which was to be held in the Camerata, consisting of 10 monks and 1 prefect, they went out and had recreation, and they played with a ball. And still today we play soccer with 11 players, without knowing that the root of this are the monasteries, the medieval monasteries. So I cannot agree with Jacques Delors, who in 1992 said that we have to give Europe a soul. We needn't give it, we need only to rediscover it. Now the third point is, the crisis, the moral cultural crisis we are in, we can tackle it through the program of cultural transformation, which the popes have called New Evangelization. And let me just say, I think we Europeans, I'm speaking as a member of Western civilization, I think we should never separate Europe from the USA, because the USA need Europe to rediscover their cultural roots, and we Europeans need the USA because it is the determining cultural leader of the West. Now, how can we renew the hierarchy of values and overcome the economic crisis? I am convinced that it is possible, but only if we rediscover what it means to be contemplative, because our economy and our society are a byproduct of contemplation. In other words, who wants to save the economy for the economy's sake will fail. Who wants to make money for money's sake will be unhappy. Now, how can we renew the hierarchy of values and overcome the economic crisis? I intentionally repeat the question. I think love in truth, caritas in veritate, already present in John 23's Pacem in Terris, is the answer. Charity as a social principle is the most important contribution of Christian humanism to society. At the heart of the Christian humanist endeavor is the theological virtue of charity. Disinterested practice of Christian charity will achieve that integral restoration of the human person which is the aim of Christian humanism. However, how can charity be infused into economic, financial, political institutions? It is not directly applicable, and it is very dangerous to use charity or love as the only social principle. That is the idea which I hear in North Korea. That is the idea which we heard in the Soviet Union. Love as social principle, that does not work. It's dangerous. It always has to go together with justice. Infusing charity institution means aligning the institutions with the principles of Catholic social teaching, with justice, human dignity, solidarity, subsidiarity, but powered from within by the wild force of charity, as Jacques Maritain said. In this sense, Christian humanism, by bringing into society the living presence of Christ, is a disturbing element. Henri de Lubac put it beautifully. Christ is first and foremost the great disturber. He awakes us from our sleep. Faith continually disturbs us and upsets the too beautiful balance of our mental conceptions and social structures. In a Christian worldview, holiness comes before peace, as Newman said. And the prophetic minorities of Maritain are really shock minorities. To stay alive, free and democratic, our liberal democracies need this influence of charity that sheds light on those who suffer in the dark, gives voice to those who are inarticulate in their screams of pain, and recognizes the legal force of their claims. Let me finish. Jesus did not instruct his apostles to build a Christian economy or a temple Christian state. Jesus sent them into the world simply as witnesses to his resurrection. So where is God today? Where is God in the economy today? Where he always was, in the hearts of his people, on their lips and in their lives. The hierarchy of values shall be renewed, beginning with the contemplative life of the lay people in the middle of economic life, in the middle of the world. Out of their hearts will come the energy and the spiritual health to overcome the crisis. Thank you very much.